if you read Putin's speeches or articles, he considers himself to be the top historian, Russian historian. From Polish perspective, this is unfair and not just. Why should they be penalized? Of course, they were a minority in these regions. Collective memory is the one which binds people together. That's the one which is relevant for today, which is taken from this cultural memory to forge community and to keep this community together.
Wars don't just end when the fighting stops. They live on. In memory, in monuments, in how communities tell their stories. But who actually gets to decide what is remembered? And perhaps more importantly, who gets to decide what is forgotten? In this video, I speak to Professor Christoph Mick of the University of Warwick about how memory has shaped Europe's conflicts and why it still matters today. I started by asking him what exactly drew him into studying the politics of memory.
Growing up in the Federal Republic of Germany, and I grew up before unification when Germany was divided, I was fascinated by how differently the two Germanys interpreted the Second World War. But this different conflict interpretation of the Second World War did not only affect the state level, it was also visible in small communities, like my village. People had really different recollection, different views, how they interpreted and make sense of the Nazi past. And in Germany, and I noticed it in my family, it took 30 years or even more before the Holocaust became a key component of their collective memory. The focus was on the bombing rates, destroying German cities and towns, on their own suffering. This memory of the Second World War was very much revolving around that, while in the rest of the world, the Second World War and the Holocaust was, of course, seen completely differently. German responsibility, collective responsibility was seen and discussed. So this led me to a broader interest in how societies remember, because I noticed it firsthand in the context I was growing up.
And how do you go about defining collective memory within your research? Because it can be quite a subjective term, can't it?
Collective memory is not an easy term, and it's also a sort of problematic term. It refers to how groups, nations, communities, institutions, can also be football clubs, Liverpool or Newcastle, remember the past through shared narratives, rituals, and symbols. So first, the concept goes back, of course, to Maurice Halbwachs, a French scholar who was writing at the beginning of the 20th century. And what is so important is to be and has to be kept in mind that this collective memory is not static. It's not something which is a given. It's evolving and changing, responding to being exposed to challenges of this memory from outside. It can be a revision within the group itself, that specific aspects, dimensions of the past are seen in a different light.
So focusing on Europe then, why does memory actually matter so much when we come to study wars throughout European history?
Specifically for Europe, Europe's history is marked over the last 1,000 years or even longer by wars, occupations, and by shifting borders. And memories and collective memory help then the post-war societies to process trauma, also to discuss who was responsible, why did it go wrong, to assign responsibility, and can also develop stories about resilience and victimhood. So, and you find this similar phenomena all over Europe. Britain was not so often at the receiving end of invasions in the last few hundred years, but other European countries were. And there's hardly a region in Eastern Europe which is not somehow contested or has been contested in the last 200 years, and where different nations, different states tried to blame it for themselves. And Eastern Europe, of course, is also a multi-ethnic region. So many different ethnic groups live together. Some, not all of these ethnic groups, national groups, they had their own state and nation-building projects, which got into conflict with station and nation-building projects of the people they were living with in the same village. in Ukraine in the 19th and early 20th century. You have Russian Ukrainian villages, you have Russian Polish one, and then there were Jews there. Sometimes there are also some Germans in this region, and they all somehow develop their own narratives about the past.
Looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict then as a case study to understand these conflicts of memory, how far back do you think these disputes over the past actually go in Ukraine and Russia? Because, there are many people that argue that this goes back all the way to the 9th century.
No, there are interpretations about the origins of both Ukraine and Russia. If you read Putin's speeches or articles, he considers himself to be the top historian, Russian historian. But this goes back to the 19th century. Already when the first large, or let's say big histories of Russia and later of Ukraine were written, the leading Russian historians, they say actually that there is a direct continuity between the Kievan Rus of the 10th century, the Principality and Tsardom of Muscovy from the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and now the Russian Federation. There's so the modern Russian Federation has its origin in the Kievan Rus, and it's the sole successor in a way of the Kievan Rus. While Ukrainian historians in the 19th century, the most important one is a guy called Mikhail Orozhevsky. They argue, no, this actually belongs to us. So actually, this Kievan Rus is the origin of Ukraine.
I think it's interesting you hint how memory can actually almost be used to reconcile communities and actually bring people together within countries. Within your research, have you seen any cases of this?
Um, Successful war remembrance sometimes works like that. So that's my new project about the unknown soldier. And you could argue that the symbol of the unknown soldier, the tomb of the unknown soldier in England is the unknown warrior buried in Westminster Abbey, had a unifying effect because of the openness of the symbol. Um, so in this case, it was relatively successful in Britain and France because they won the war. So the population could be told, those who had lost relatives, that this war had meaning. It ended with defending the borders of France or regaining, for example, Alsace and Lorraine. The victory made it easier to offer the population, especially those who had lost their sons in this war, a meaning. So made that death meaningful, which also is in a way comforting.
I suppose the final thing I want to ask you, Christoph, is why should people pay more attention to the role of memory and memory conflicts within history?
So engaging with memory in a responsible way means also recognizing the power it has to shape the future and not just reflect the past.
Christoph, thank you for joining me.